In the golden glow of a winter afternoon, the world outside the gleaming glass doors of the toy store shimmered with a quiet promise of innocence and joy. Inside, laughter echoed softly over the hum of childhood dreams, until a sudden hush fell like a heavy curtain. A woman, her face weathered but her eyes bright with unyielding hope, was gently but firmly led toward the exit. Her shoulders trembled, not from the cold, but from a quiet battle fought in the shadows of her mind. She clutched a battered bag, its contents a fragile hope, scraps of a life that had once known stability, now reduced to a fleeting illusion. The man watching from across the street, wealthy, privileged, and seemingly detached, felt his gaze tighten. He was no stranger to luxury, to the kind of life that shimmered under chandeliers and wrapped around him like an invisible cloak. Yet, as he observed her, a flicker of something unfamiliar stirred within him, an ache, a question that refused to be silenced. Why was she here? How had she come to this moment? The questions hung there, suspended in the crisp winter air, unresolved and heavy with unspoken stories. In that instant, the scene felt like a brushstroke on a vast canvas, powerful, quiet, and haunting. The woman's silhouette, small against the towering storefront, seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 silent tears. Her resilience shone through the cracks in her armor, a testament to a life forged in hardship yet never broken. She was more than a figure lost in circumstance. She was a mirror of every unvoiced struggle, every sacrifice made in the shadows for a hope that refused to die. As she turned away from the store, her steps hesitant but determined, the world around her continued in its busy rhythm. But for the man watching, time seemed to slow, every detail etched into his mind like a silent prayer. Beneath the veneer of wealth and comfort, he saw the raw, unfiltered truth of human vulnerability, an unspoken reminder that life's greatest stories are often written in moments of quiet despair and resilience. And so, in the cold winter light, the scene beckoned us to look closer, to see not just her pain, but the quiet strength that sustains us all. Because behind every story of hardship lies a seed of hope, waiting to bloom in the most unexpected moments. The question lingers, what will happen when those moments collide? How will the silent resilience of one woman spark a change no one saw coming? As we step forward into her story, we are reminded that sometimes, it is in the shadows that the brightest light begins to shine. Her name was Lily, though few knew her by that name anymore. She had once carried the presence of a woman who believed in brighter days, in the promise of small beginnings. But time had worn her down, like wind eroding stone, slowly, relentlessly. Now she moved through the world with a quiet heaviness, shoulders hunched as if carrying invisible weights. Her eyes, once vibrant with hope, were clouded with a persistent ache, a silent grief that haunted her every step. The nights were longer than they used to be, filled with restless echoes of a past that refused to fade, memories of her child's laughter, and the warmth of a home she lost, piece by fragile piece. She had loved fiercely once, fiercely enough to hold on to her dreams even when the world told her to let go. But life had a way of breaking even the strongest spirits, an illness that drained her strength, a series of misfortunes that left her isolated, and the relentless tide of rejection that made her feel invisible. Every morning was a quiet battle, waking up with aching muscles, a hollow stomach, and a heart that refused to surrender to despair. She was no stranger to loneliness. It had become her constant companion, whispering in her ear in the quiet hours when the world was asleep. Yet, amidst the shadows, Lily still clung to a fragile thread of hope, an ember buried beneath layers of sorrow. She watched children's laughter from afar, longing to give her own little one the joy of the simple things, even if her own hands could no longer grasp them. Her fingers, once nimble and eager, had grown stiff from cold and neglect, bearing the marks of her relentless struggle. She had loved her child more than anything in the world, and now that love was a ghost that haunted her every step, fueling her silent resilience. As she was pushed out of the toy store that day, a place she had hoped to find a fleeting moment of joy, the sting of rejection cut deeper than the cold winter air. Her face, etched with the lines of hardship, betrayed no anger, only a quiet surrender. She felt the weight of her loneliness pressing down, yet beneath that, a flicker of something unbreakable. A stubborn whisper that said she would endure, even if it meant walking through the shadows alone. Her tears, if they fell, would blend into the snow, unnoticed and unacknowledged, yet they carried the strength of a soul still fighting to believe in tomorrow. Faintly in her eyes was a quiet invitation, an unspoken plea for understanding, for compassion. Because beneath her fragile exterior lay the heart of someone who had loved fiercely and lost deeply, yet refused to be erased. In that silent ache, there was a story waiting to be told, a story of resilience born from heartbreak, of hope buried beneath layers of pain. And as she turned away from the cold glass doors, her figure fading into the winter haze, the world was invited to see not just her wounds, but the quiet power of a spirit that refused to be broken. On the other side of the street, the man watched her retreat into the winter haze, his mind caught between the comfort of his wealth and the raw, unspoken pain he had just witnessed. He was an ordinary man, with imperfections etched into his face, faint lines from worry, a patchy beard, and eyes that often hid more than they revealed. His name was David, a businessman who had inherited his family's toy store and built an empire of shiny displays and polished floors. Yet, standing there, observing her small figure disappear into the cold, he felt an unsettling pull, an awareness that wealth had not prepared him for moments like these. He hesitated, torn between turning away and stepping closer. The quiet hum of passing cars filled the space between them, a reminder of the world rushing on, indifferent to her silent suffering. David's own childhood memories flickered, memories of a different life, one filled with struggle and hope, of a mother who worked tirelessly to keep their small apartment afloat. He remembered the nights he had fallen asleep hungry, dreaming of a day when he could give back, a day when he could make a difference. But life had a way of pulling people in different directions, and he had become a man defined by ideals, deadlines, and the illusion of control. Now, watching her move with such fragile grace, he felt an unexpected ache. He was no hero, no saint, just a man who'd built a fortress of privilege around himself, often blind to the suffering beyond his walls. Yet something about her, her quiet resilience, her unseen battles, made him question everything he thought he knew about kindness. Without a grand plan or a clear intention, he found himself taking a cautious step forward, hands tucked into his coat pockets, trying to appear casual. As he approached, he hesitated again, unsure if she'd even notice him. She was small, hunched but still upright, her worn coat pulled tightly around her. He spoke softly, almost awkwardly. "Excuse me, I saw what happened. I didn't mean for you to feel pushed out." His voice was rough, unpolished, like a stone smoothed by years of neglect. Her eyes flicked to him, wary and guarded, as if expecting another rejection. He took a breath, feeling the weight of his words and the unspoken apology behind them. "I know this isn't much, but if you need anything, just let me know." His voice trailed off, uncertain if she'd even hear him, let alone accept. She looked at him, eyes weary but not unkind, and for a moment, all the barriers that separated them seemed to dissolve in the cold air. He watched her silently, unsure if his words had any meaning beyond the moment. Perhaps they did, perhaps they wouldn't. But as she turned away again, he was left with the quiet realization that sometimes, the smallest gestures, an unspoken acknowledgement, a simple act of kindness, could plant a seed in the darkness. A flicker of hope that, even in the most fractured of lives, humanity still endured. And so, in the gentle silence that followed, the world held its breath, waiting to see if that fragile seed would take root, grow quietly, and someday, blossom into something more. Because sometimes, all it takes is a single, imperfect act of kindness to remind us that beneath every scar, there's a story worth hearing, and a heart still beating with the possibility of change. Over the next few days, tiny moments began to weave a fragile thread between Lily and David, subtle yet meaningful. It started with a simple gesture, him noticing her sitting on a park bench, eyes fixed on the distant horizon, lost in thought. Without a word, he approached, gently placing a paper bag beside her. Inside were a few warm sandwiches and a flask of tea, the kind she hadn't tasted in a long while. Her eyes flickered with surprise, a flicker of gratitude that she quickly masked with a quiet nod. That small act, ordinary in its nature, felt like a fragile bridge across the vast chasm of her loneliness. The next day, David arrived at her makeshift shelter, a corner under a crumbling awning, carrying an old umbrella. He offered it with a hesitant smile, the kind that acknowledged her need without pity. Lily hesitated, then accepted, feeling the fabric shelter her from the rain that threatened to seep into her bones. She looked at him, the faintest trace of a smile touching her lips, and in that moment she saw a flicker of understanding. No grand promises, no attempts to fix her life, just a simple act of sharing the shelter from the storm. As days went on, their interactions became a quiet rhythm, him offering her a ride to a nearby food bank, her accepting a second-hand coat that was just a little too big but warm enough for the freezing nights. Each gesture was unspoken yet deeply felt, like small stones laid carefully along the path. The way he would pause during his busy mornings to check if she needed anything, or how he'd leave a small note on her makeshift table. "Stay safe today," became tiny anchors of human connection in her otherwise isolated world. One afternoon, he invited her to sit on a park bench while he bought a coffee from a nearby vendor. They sat in silence, the city bustling around them, but for Lily, the noise faded. Her fingers clutched the warm cup, feeling the heat seep into her chilled hands. David just looked at her, not with pity but with a quiet respect. When she nervously reached for the cup, he gently pressed her hand away, offering her a soft smile. "You need to hold on to what's yours," he said softly. "Even if it's just a little bit of warmth today." Sometimes he would walk with her to the edge of the city, pointing out a small garden tucked behind a crumbling wall, an unexpected splash of green amid concrete ruins. They'd pause there, and he'd tell her stories, simple stories of his childhood, of mistakes made, lessons learned. Not to teach her, but to remind her that everyone's journey is imperfect. That even in broken places, beauty can still grow, if only you have the patience to nurture it. The gestures grew more natural, almost like breathing. A shared umbrella when the rain suddenly appeared. A small plastic bag of fresh fruit left on her doorstep after a visit to the market. He never pushed, just offered, just shared, just listened. Through these small acts, Lily's guarded walls began to soften, her loneliness slowly chipped away by the genuine kindness of someone who dared to see her not as a problem, but as a person. But beneath the surface, unseen tensions were mounting, an external conflict brewing that threatened to unravel this fragile patchwork of connection. Rumors of her presence, the tenuous stability of her life, and the shadows of her past soon started to stir disturbances that even the smallest gestures couldn't fully shield her from. Yet, in these quiet moments of kindness, there was a seed, an unspoken hope, that perhaps, amidst the chaos, resilience could take root, quietly and unassumingly, like a single wild flower blooming through cracks in concrete. And so, with each passing day, as Lily felt the warmth of these simple acts, she also sensed that her story was beginning to shift, not with dramatic change, but with the slow, gentle unfolding of human connection. Like dawn breaking over a darkened sky, these small gestures whispered of a new beginning, one that refused to be drowned out by the external storms waiting on the horizon. The question remained, how would this fragile thread hold when the winds of adversity finally blew stronger? But for now, she held on to the warmth, knowing that sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken hopes. It was a quiet morning when the first whispers began to ripple through the neighborhood, carried on the wind like a fragile thread of gossip. Lily had been seen talking with David more often, walking together, sharing small meals, and sitting under the shade of a tree, their quiet companionship growing amidst the chaos of her life. At first, it was dismissed as kindness, as a simple act of a man trying to do right. But then came the whispers, subtle at first, then louder, more insistent. Rumors spread like wildfire, fueled by neighbors who watched with suspicion and judgment. Some saw her as a problem, a stain on the pristine image of their community. Others whispered about her past, about the hardships she'd faced, framing her vulnerability as a sign of failure or even shame. The stories grew darker, more invasive, until they reached the ears of her own family. Her mother, already strained under the weight of her own disappointments, called to her with a voice trembling with worry and anger. "You're risking everything," she warned, her words sharp and unyielding. "People are talking. You can't keep hiding with a stranger. It's not safe. It's not right." Lily's heart sank. The fragile thread she'd been holding onto, the small hope that kindness could transform her life, was being pulled taut, strained by the weight of external judgment. Every step she took outside was shadowed by the fear of discovery, of rejection from the only community she'd ever known. The gossip spread into the local markets, into the church, into every corner where whispers could grow into accusations. The media caught wind of her story, twisting her circumstances into something sensational. Photographs of her with David, once innocent and rooted in quiet kindness, now circulated with headlines that painted her as a scandal, an example of failure, of vulnerability exploited. The judge of public opinion was swift and unforgiving. Her name became a whisper of shame in the wind, her presence in the neighborhood now viewed through a lens of suspicion and disdain. Her simple acts of kindness, once a source of hope, felt like shackles tightening around her. David, too, faced the storm of judgment. Friends and colleagues questioned his motives, whispering behind closed doors about his reputation, about whether he was meddling in something he shouldn't. His own family, wary of scandal, urged him to stay away, to cut ties before the flames of gossip consumed his name. The external pressure pressed hard, threatening to crush the fragile bond that held Lily and David together. It was as if the community's collective gaze had turned into a storm, ready to drown her in its relentless tide of suspicion and rejection. Yet, amidst the chaos, Lily's resolve wavered but did not break. She clung to the quiet strength of her bond with David, knowing that this external obstacle was designed not only to test her resilience, but to break her spirit entirely. She felt the weight of the world pressing down, a dark cloud threatening to swallow her whole. The fear of losing everything, her dignity, her hope, the fragile connection with David, loomed large in her mind. But in the depths of that fear, a flicker of determination remained. She had come so far, fought so hard just to survive, and she refused to let the external noise drown out the small voice inside her that still believed in kindness, in humanity, in the possibility of a better tomorrow. As the storm approached, Lily looked at David, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and unwavering resolve. The external obstacle was massive, towering like a mountain ready to crush her dreams, but she knew, deep in her heart, that sometimes it's in the fiercest storms that the strongest roots take hold. And in that moment she found a quiet courage, a reminder that even the darkest clouds can give way to dawn, if only one dares to stand firm against the wind. The question was no longer just about their bond. It was about whether they could face the storm and emerge on the other side, stronger and more resilient than ever. Because sometimes, the greatest test of loyalty is not in the quiet moments, but in the storm that threatens to tear everything apart. David watched from a distance as Lily gathered herself after another round of harsh whispers and sideways glances. She moved through her day with a quiet determination, her shoulders slightly hunched but her eyes steadfast. He knew that the external storm was fierce, and he understood that words and gossip could chip away at the strongest of spirits. But he also saw her resolve, an unspoken strength that refused to be broken. He didn't rush to her side with grand gestures or noisy declarations. Instead, he chose to stay nearby, a silent presence that spoke volumes without words. Some mornings he'd linger at the edge of the park or the corner of the market, watching her as she navigated the world that seemed increasingly hostile. He'd see her pause, clutching her worn bag close, her gaze fixed on the ground, yet her steps still purposeful. On other days, he'd simply walk beside her, matching her slow, deliberate pace, offering her the comfort of shared silence rather than empty reassurance. He didn't need to say much. His presence alone became an anchor, a steadying force amid the chaos. When she hesitated at the edge of the street, he was there, just a few steps behind, a shadow of loyalty. When her voice wavered in uncertain conversations, he listened quietly, never interrupting, never offering advice unless she asked. His loyalty was not in grand acts but in the consistency of his quiet support, an unspoken promise that she wasn't alone, even when the world seemed determined to push her aside. Sometimes he'd bring her a cup of coffee from a nearby cafe, placing it gently in her hand without fanfare. Other times, he'd simply walk alongside her, offering his presence as a shield against the biting words of others. His support was human, that honest, imperfect kind of loyalty rooted in understanding that life's battles are fought not only with strength but with the steadiness of companionship. Lily often caught his gaze when she thought no one was looking, and in those moments she saw something unspoken, a quiet conviction that her struggles mattered, that her resilience was seen, even if not understood by everyone. She felt the weight of her pain, but also the gentle reassurance of someone who chose to stay, not because he saw her as a problem to be solved, but because he believed in her worth as a person. Her journey was long and winding, filled with moments of doubt and small victories, and David's steady presence became a part of her quiet armor. His loyalty wasn't in dramatic saves or sweeping gestures but in the simple act of showing up, day after day, with patience and unwavering support. It was in the way he listened without judgment, in the way he walked beside her when her steps faltered, in the silent promise that, no matter what, she was not alone. As days turned into weeks, Lily's internal world shifted slowly, her resolve deepening. She began to see that loyalty wasn't always about grand words, it was about the small, consistent acts that said, "I am here." It was about the way her heart found a new rhythm, one that beat in time with the quiet strength of her steadfast friend. And in that quiet, unspoken support, Lily discovered a truth she had always known deep inside, that resilience isn't forged in isolation, but in the bonds we nurture quietly, patiently, those fragile threads of loyalty that hold us together when everything else seems to unravel. She looked ahead now, her gaze steady, knowing that this support, the gentle, persistent presence of someone who refused to turn away, was the foundation upon which her hope could rebuild. Because sometimes, it's not the grand gestures that change lives, but the quiet assurance of someone standing firm beside us, even in the darkest storms, reminding us that, in the end, what truly matters is the unwavering belief in our capacity to endure and to bloom again. Lily's days slowly shifted from shadows of doubt to hints of dawn. The quiet support she'd received, those small, steadfast acts of kindness, began to seed something new inside her. It wasn't immediate, nor was it dramatic, but gradually she felt a flicker of warmth rekindle within her, a gentle reminder that her worth wasn't defined by circumstances or the judgments of others. She started to wake up with a different kind of hope, one that whispered that her story was still being written, that her voice still held power. With each passing day, she allowed herself to dream again, even if those dreams were simple, perhaps a small garden to tend, a way to teach her child what resilience looked like firsthand. She began to see herself not just as a survivor, but as someone capable of giving back, of creating something meaningful from the fragments of her life. Her smile, once rare and tentative, started to bloom more often, a quiet rebirth that she kept mostly to herself but felt deep within. She found moments to laugh, to notice beauty in small things, the way the sunlight hit the leaves, the sound of children's laughter in the distance, the fresh scent of rain on the earth. Slowly, she began to craft moments of joy from the ashes of her hardships, realizing these were her own gifts, her own small victories. She started to teach her child to see their worth, not as a reflection of society's judgments, but as something innate, something that no external storm could take away. Her hands, once trembling with uncertainty, grew steadier as she rediscovered her capacity to create, to nurture, to inspire. She'd gather bits of discarded fabric and stitch small toys for her child, not because she expected recognition, but because in those quiet acts she found purpose, an affirmation that she could still give, still build, still dream. The more she looked inward, the more she understood that her healing wasn't about waiting for rescue but about reclaiming her own sense of worth. She didn't need to be saved by anyone, she needed to remember that her resilience had always been there, waiting beneath the layers of pain and rejection. Her heart, battered but still beating, began to pulse with a steady rhythm of hope. She started sharing her stories with others, not as a plea for pity but as a testament to the strength that rises from struggle. She realized that her lessons, her scars, and her small acts of kindness could be the seeds of something greater, an inspiration for others who had lost their way. Lily's internal transformation was subtle but profound. It was in the way her eyes grew brighter, her voice steadier, and her spirit more rooted in her own truth. She understood that her worth was not measured by what others thought of her but by the quiet fire she carried within, an unbreakable core that refused to be extinguished. As she looked toward the horizon, she saw a future that was no longer defined by hardship but by possibility. Her journey had taught her that healing isn't about erasing pain but about learning to carry it with grace, turning wounds into wisdom and sorrow into strength. And in that awakening, she found the true gift, herself, renewed and resilient, ready to face whatever came next with a gentle smile and a heart full of hope. Because sometimes, it's in the quiet moments of rediscovery that we realize the greatest truth: our worth is always within us, waiting patiently for us to remember. And when we do, the world begins to change, not around us, but within us, shining brighter with every step we take toward our own light. Under the soft glow of string lights, the community gathered in the town square, a space once filled with whispers of judgment now echoing with whispers of hope. The air was thick with anticipation, a collective breath held as Lily stepped onto the makeshift stage, her hands trembling slightly but her eyes steady. She looked out at faces she had known all her life, neighbors, friends, strangers, each one holding their own stories, their own judgments, and perhaps their own doubts. But tonight she was here, not as the woman who had once been pushed aside or judged unfairly, but as herself, whole, resilient, and unafraid. The microphone felt heavy in her hands, yet her voice, when she finally found it, was clear and unwavering. She began by sharing her journey, not in words of despair, but in the quiet strength of someone who had learned to stand tall despite the storms. She spoke of her pain, her fears, but also of the hope she'd rediscovered, how small acts of kindness, her own internal turning points, had begun to heal the wounds society had tried to bury. Her words wove through the crowd, not with grandeur, but with a gentle, honest truth that touched everyone listening. She told them how she learned that worth isn't measured by what others see but by the quiet fire within, by the ability to forgive oneself, to keep dreaming, and to find beauty in the ordinary. As she spoke, Lily's voice grew stronger, her words no longer trembling but resonating with unwavering courage. She admitted her fears, fear of rejection, of judgment, of falling again into despair. But she also shared her hope, that her story was just one among many, that her journey could inspire others to see the worth in themselves and in each other. She looked out at the community, her gaze finally reaching the faces that had once looked away or whispered behind closed doors. And in that moment, she knew she was no longer defined by the shadows of her past but by the luminous strength she carried within. The crowd was silent, then slowly, applause began, soft at first, then swelling into a chorus of recognition. Some people's eyes glistened with tears, others nodded quietly, moved by her honesty. What had begun as a moment of personal confrontation had transformed into a collective acknowledgement. Here was a woman who had faced her fears head-on in front of everyone, who dared to show her raw, unfiltered truth, and in doing so, had broken the chains of shame and silence that had once held her captive. In that shared space, Lily's vulnerability became a bridge. The community saw her not as a problem to be solved, but as a human being who had endured, who had grown stronger through her struggles. Her courage sparked a ripple, inspiring others to look within themselves and confront their own fears. The moment was a testament to the power of authenticity, a reminder that real change begins when we dare to stand in our truth, even when the world around us hesitates. As she stepped down from the stage, her heart pounding with a mixture of relief and hope, Lily felt the weight of the past lifting, replaced by a quiet conviction. She had faced her fears in front of everyone, and in doing so, had reclaimed her voice, her dignity, her purpose. Her journey was far from over, but that night, amid the applause and the gentle hum of the community rallying around her, she knew she was no longer alone. The sky above the square shimmered with the first stars of evening, a poetic reminder that even in darkness, light persists, sometimes flickering faintly, sometimes blazing boldly. Lily's story, like those stars, was a testament to resilience, a call to others to find their own light within. And as she looked ahead, she understood that this moment, this act of courage, was only the beginning of a new chapter, one written by her own hand, illuminated by the quiet strength of her voice. The air in the small living room felt heavy with unspoken words, memories layered thick with regret and longing. Lily sat quietly on the worn-out sofa, her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the floor. She had braced herself for this moment, the long-overdue conversation with her mother, a woman whose voice had once been stern, whose words had cut deep, leaving scars that lingered in silence. Tonight, her mother's footsteps echoed softly into the room, hesitant but determined. She paused at the doorway, eyes glistening with the weight of her own regret, before slowly crossing the space to sit beside Lily. For a moment neither spoke, the silence stretching like a fragile thread between them. Then, softly, her mother reached out, her hand trembling as it touched Lily's. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked into her daughter's face, so weary, yet so resilient. Her voice cracked as she finally broke the silence. "I was wrong. I didn't see you for who you truly are. I let my fears and my pride blind me. I thought I was protecting you, but I was only pushing you further away." Lily's breath hitched, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears, the pain of years of misunderstanding bubbling to the surface. She wanted to believe her mother's words, yet a part of her hesitated, fear of more disappointment, more rejection. But as her mother continued, her voice raw with remorse, she saw the sincerity in her eyes. "I judged you without understanding, without really listening. I thought I knew your story, but I was wrong. You've carried so much more than I ever realized, and I see now how brave you've been. I see the strength in you, your hope, your love for your child, your determination to survive against all odds." Lily's voice trembled as she finally spoke. "It's been a long road, Mom. I needed you to see me, not as the failure or the shame you thought I was, but as your daughter who's still fighting, still hoping." Her mother's hand tightened around hers, tears spilling over as she nodded. "I see that now. I see you, truly see you. And I'm sorry for the pain I caused. For turning away when you needed me most. I was wrong, and I want to make things right, if you'll let me." The words hung in the air, fragile but genuine, like the first light of dawn breaking through a long night. Lily felt the warmth bloom in her chest, a cautious hope that this moment could be the start of healing, a slow, patient process that no apology could instantly erase but could nurture into something stronger. Her mother's tears shimmered in the soft glow of the evening, and for the first time in a long while they embraced, not just as mother and daughter, but as two souls seeking forgiveness, understanding, and redemption. This wasn't a story of instant reconciliation but a quiet acknowledgement of past wounds, given space to breathe and heal. As they sat together, the shadows of the room softened, the silent promise of a renewed bond beginning to take root, one built on honesty, humility, and love that refused to be broken by time. Outside, the sky stretched wide and endless, painted in hues of pink and gold, whispering that even the darkest nights give way to dawn. The stars began to twinkle above, silent witnesses to a moment of true redemption. Lily looked at her mother, her heart steady but open, realizing that forgiveness isn't a single act but a journey, a delicate dance of patience and grace. And in that quiet, sacred space, they both understood that the future was theirs to create, step by step, with compassion guiding their way. The night whispered promises of new beginnings, reminding them that every scar bears the story of survival, and every act of forgiveness is a seed sown in hope. As they held each other close, they knew this was only the beginning, a chapter of healing, written in the quiet poetry of a love rediscovered, a testament to the enduring power of humility and grace. As the first light of dawn stretched across the horizon, the world seemed to hold its breath in quiet anticipation. The sky was painted with gentle strokes of pink and gold, a tender reminder that even the darkest nights yield to the promise of new beginnings. Lily stood outside, gazing upward at the awakening sky, feeling a delicate peace settle into her soul, and understanding that love, true love, is not some miraculous escape from pain or hardship, but a steadfast proof that no one is truly alone in their struggles. The stars above shimmered softly, distant yet constant, whispering silent stories of resilience and hope. They reminded her that even in the darkest hours, light persists, sometimes flickering faintly, sometimes blazing boldly, always guiding those who seek it. The gentle rustle of leaves in the morning breeze was like nature's quiet lullaby, a reminder that life moves forward in cycles of change, patience, and renewal. Every scar, every tear, every moment of vulnerability had woven itself into her story, a testament that survival is an act of quiet resistance, and love is what sustains us through it all. As she turned to walk back into her day, Lily carried with her the knowledge that her journey was part of a larger tapestry, one woven with threads of compassion and understanding, binding us all in a shared human experience. The world outside may be vast and often indifferent, but within it, small acts of kindness ripple outward, creating waves of hope that reach far beyond what we can see. Her story, like the sunrise, was a gentle reminder that darkness itself is fleeting, and that even the smallest light can illuminate the path for others. We all have moments where we feel lost in the silence of our struggles, yet it is in these quiet spaces that true strength is born, strength that whispers softly to us, urging us to keep going, to keep loving, to keep believing in the possibility of a better tomorrow. So, as you step into your own day, remember that love is not the absence of pain, but the presence of connection, a reminder that no one walks alone when hearts are open and spirits are willing to heal. Let the stars above inspire you to be a light in someone's darkness, to offer kindness without expectation, and to recognize that each of us carries the power to make a difference, however small. Like the dawn that follows every night, your actions, your words, your compassion, can ignite hope in the hearts of others, forging a world where love is the quiet, enduring force that unites us all. If this story has touched your heart, consider sharing it, like a ripple across still waters, so that more can see that love is always within reach, always waiting to be shared. Subscribe to keep stories alive, stories that remind us of our shared humanity, and the beauty of standing together, even in silence. Because in the end, it's not about the grand miracles, but about the everyday moments that remind us love is the most powerful, most enduring truth in this vast, beautiful universe. And as the sun rises higher, casting light on the world anew, let us walk forward with open hearts, ready to be the gentle stars guiding others through their night.